My name is Elizabeth Danter, and I'm a research fellow with the New Knowledge Organization in New York City. I'm talking to you today about behavior change and environmental education. Many researchers within the field believe that the ultimate goal of environmental education should be to change individuals' behavior so that he or she has the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, motivations, and intention to solve and prevent environmental problems. This assumption comes from the idea that political cultural changes depend first on personal behavior changes and then at the societal level. In the 1980s and 90s, environmental education researchers sought to identify the predictors of responsible environmental behavior in order to address environmental problems. These traditional models suggested that environmental literacy advances in linear stages, from knowledge to attitudes and then to behavior. After further studies revealed that attitudes don't always predict behavior, researchers questioned the gap between having environmental knowledge and awareness and displaying pro-environmental behaviors. For example, people will often express positive attitudes towards an activity, yet also report that they rarely engage in that activity. In other words, people might self-identify as environmentalists, yet not act in a pro-environmental way. The question of what shapes pro-environmental behavior is such a complex one that it likely cannot be visualized through one single framework or diagram. Human beings and the culture in which they live are very different. It's doubtful that there's a universal model that will consistently capture all of the variables that impact our environmental behavior. But this isn't to say that previous research has not been valuable, or that we should not continue to seek out promising variables related to behavior change. And rather, we need to allow for variables within a model to change according to the behavior in question, in combination with the specific population being targeted. Several important findings from behavior change research have enabled educators to improve their programs, revise the way they frame their communication, and to develop more effective curricula. For example, we found that the greater a person's perception of control over engaging in a behavior, the greater his or her attitude correlates with an intention to do something. Educators are able to use that information by teaching the skills that students need to feel empowered. Other studies have shown that while generally positive attitudes towards the environment do not predict whether that individual will take specific environmental behaviors, attitudes towards specific problems do have predictive value. So in education, we focus on changing specific behaviors to address specific problems. Skills are teachable. It's not enough to simply educate people regarding the need for pro-environmental behavior. It requires additional messaging. Social marketing campaigns target specific behaviors to change by creating optimal conditions for action. Some environmental educators have used social marketing for short-term, specific behavior changes and used environmental education programs for longer-term, more general attitude and behavioral outcomes. Research reinforces the idea that, as educators, we need to consider each of the distinct behaviors and actions that make up the larger environmental behavior we hope people will undertake. In dissecting environmental behaviors into habits, tasks, and skills, opportunities exist for those small individual changes to equal greater collective change. I've included a selection of behavior change models in the assigned readings, and I encourage you to consider the variables and context within each of them. Think about whether they would be relevant in your community and what might need to be revised. Also, explore how behavior change is being studied in other academic fields. A promising new area of research in public health is called implementation science. As environmental education practitioners, we need to define what we mean by behavior change with regard to environmental education and design and measure our programs accordingly. Clarifying the behavior of interest is key, not only for the person being asked to learn and change, but for the educator to assess whether change has occurred. Thank you very much for your time today.